So we've been in this study lately entitled Foundations, where we've been just talking about the basic tenets of Christianity, the basic truths of the Christian faith. And within this study, we've come to the place where we have begun studying creation. How did God create the world? What is biblical creation like? And as we come to this kind of a subject, there's naturally a question that comes up. There's kind of an elephant that's in the room. And that is, well, if the Bible teaches so clearly about the fact that God created the world and everything in it, especially mankind, what happens? What happens when we run up against things like evolution? So this morning, I want to talk to you about what your teacher never told you. Now, before I begin, I want to say something. I want to make this very, very clear. If you did not catch last week's message was the foundation for this one. If you didn't catch last week's, this one isn't going to make a whole lot of sense. So if you didn't, I encourage you to go online on the website, newhopesv.com, watch last week's message. It will be up there today. Please watch that because it'll give you some perspective, some balance. Let me just quickly give you a 1-minute recap of last week, okay? Here it comes. The Bible does not allow for an interpretation of Darwinian macroevolution, not microevolution, but macroevolution, the idea that we evolved eventually from single-celled organisms all the way up to where we are now. The Bible does not allow for that idea, no matter how you twist it or try to interpret it, okay? The Bible teaches that God created the earth and all that is in it, okay, which includes you and I. Last week, we also talked about the fact that science itself is not the enemy. Science is not the enemy of Scripture. It's not the enemy of Christianity. Quite the contrary. It is actually rather a quite strong ally in the battle for the truth. And so we should run towards science. Lastly, we learned last week that you and I as believers, or anyone for that matter, should be highly skeptical of accepting any views which lack the necessary evidence in order to be supported scientifically. And we should research those things. We should not just take for granted just because someone says, oh, this has been proven scientifically. We should research to see whether there is indeed empirical evidence for that basis of that statement. Last time we demonstrated that a number of scientific disciplines, as well as a large number of scientists, are challenging the viability today of Darwinian macroevolution. And they're doing it in numbers. In fact, I presented you last week a paper of between 600 and 700 scientists who have dissented from Darwinism. In other words, they're saying, look, Darwinism is nonsense scientifically, okay? From a number of different scientific disciplines. Many of these who are tenured researchers and professors at places like Cambridge and Princeton and UCLA and MIT and Oxford and Harvard and Rutgers, Stanford, Berkeley, and many more. There are today, for example, well over 5,000 scientists and professors who reject Darwinism, just flat out reject it, and have signed paperwork to claim that, in support of that, their rejection of it. Plus, today, there are over 30,000. Now, for you public school teachers, catch this, in case you think you're alone. There are well over 30,000 public school teachers in the United States that teach biology who do not believe in Darwinism. Okay? 30,000. There are over 100,000 college and university professors in the United States alone who agree that intelligent design is a serious scientific alternative to Darwinian theory of evolution. Okay? I'm just trying to put this stuff in perspective for you, because often we're not told that side of the story. There are 570,000, I'll say that number again, 570,000 professional practicing medical doctors in the United States alone. These are specialists in applied sciences who believe in intelligent design as a scientific theory over and above Darwinian evolution. Okay? That's 3 out of every 5 medical doctors. Okay? Here's the odd thing as I'm reading these statistics. You're sitting there going, really? I did not know that. And here's why you didn't know it. Because you, just like I, are products of media, are products of the entertainment that we're fed, are products of that to which we are exposed, be it on the news, be it on Discovery Channel or Animal Planet or History Channel or whatever. Whoever's selling us the load of goods that we're being sold is only selling us one side of it. I want to just give you one example. Literally I have hundreds, okay? But I just throw you one because of lack of time. We could spend another month just talking about this. But as one example, Oxford professor of biology, Dennis Noble, in the Journal of Experimental Physiology, now this is a peer-reviewed journal. I don't know if you guys understand what peer-reviewed journals are, okay? But these are things that scientists look at and go, yeah, we can buy that. Now listen to what he says in Experimental Psychology. He said, listen to this quote, all of the central assumptions of the modern synthesis, which is also called neo-Darwinism, have been scientifically disproved. All. This isn't a peer-reviewed journal, folks. The Journal of Evolutionary Biology itself, by the way, states this, as I'm quoting, quote, "A persistent debate in evolutionary biology continues to be the debate over the continuity of microevolution and macroevolution." Okay? Whether macroevolutionary trends are governed by principles of microevolution. So they're saying there's this debate going on. There are serious scientists debating this, saying, wait a minute, this just doesn't work. But yet there are Darwin marketing reps like Dawkins, Coyne, Myers, Drauss, who pretend that this is a settled matter, who pretend that this scientific debate isn't happening. And it's not settled by any stretch of the imagination, but they would have you believe that it is. Psalm 111, verse 2 says this, "Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them." Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them. What are the works of the Lord? Well, the works of the Lord partly are his creation, everything that he's made. Folks, we should run towards science rather than run away from it. We've got nothing to fear. Truth is truth, and all truth is God's truth. And all truth sets us free. But see, here's the question this morning. You say, why in a sermon are we talking about evolution? I'll tell you why. Because this is the crux upon which so much of today's philosophical ideology is based. And folks, you and I as Christians need to understand this issue clearly. So the question is this: if there is indeed so much scientific evidence against Darwinian macroevolution, then why still do the majority of scientists and, more importantly, scientific institutions seem to be so much in favor of it? That's a good question, isn't it? Wouldn't you like to know the answer to that? Why are there highly qualified scientists on both sides of this debate? Wait a minute, I thought science was empiricism here. I thought science was prove it to me or get out of class. Why is there a debate going on? Look, this isn't politics, right? This isn't philosophy. This isn't religion. Why are we debating these things? Why are highly qualified scientists on both sides of the debate? And why is there such a huge dichotomy between them? I want to just touch on this morning. I want you to understand this morning the relationship between evolution and science. The relationship between evolution and science, because they are often touted as the same thing. If you've been around for very long, and you've spoken with those who are staunch proponents of evolution, they will say, well, we believe in science. You guys go ahead and believe in your little mystic fairies over there and keep dancing around the fire. I'm a man of science. And they tout it as though evolution and science were the same thing. Far from it. Far from it. Now, there are some scientists who believe in evolution. In fact, a majority of them do. But here's the problem. What is the relationship between evolution and science? Well, I'll tell you this. It's a very, very tenuous one. It's a very, very troubled one. You say, give me some examples. Again, I wish we had the time for me to read you hundreds of articles. I really do. But but I don't have that time. So I will just very quickly read you this, okay? I'll just give you a couple of examples and we'll move on from here. This is a article. This is from an article that was published by George Kaler. It was published in the Ledger in Lynchburg, Virginia. I'll give you all the specs on it. I'll give you the references. It was published in the Ledger on February 12th of 2000, okay? Now this is a quote from the article. This is the columnist George Kaler interviewing. He is interviewing a molecular biologist who wishes not to be named, okay? But the source can give you the credibility of these facts. So the George is interviewing this molecular biologist who we will call Jay. Jay says, quote, now this is a quote of the whole conversation from here on, quote, "I'm a bit like an editor trying to find a spelling mistake inside a document larger than 4 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica." George, the interviewer, says, "Do you believe that information evolved?" Jay, "George, nobody I know in my profession believes it evolved. It was engineered by, quote, genius beyond genius, and such information could not have been written in any other way. The paper and ink did not write the book. Knowing what we know now as scientists, it is ridiculous to think otherwise." The interviewer, George, "Have you ever stated that in a public lecture or in any public writings?" Jay, "No, I just say it evolved." To be a molecular biologist requires one to hold onto 2 insanities at the same time. 1, it would be insane to believe in evolution when you can see the truth for yourself. 2, it would be insane to say that you don't believe in evolution, because all government work, all research grants, all papers, all big colleges, everything would stop. I'd be out of a job or relegated to the outer fringes where I couldn't earn a decent living. George, I hate to say it, but that sounds intellectually dishonest of you. Jay, understand, the work I do in genetic research is honorable. We will find cures to many of mankind's worst diseases. But in the meantime, we have to live with the elephant in the room. George, what's the elephant? Jay, it's creation by intelligent design. It's like an elephant in the room because it moves around, it takes up enormous amounts of space, it loudly trumpets, it bumps into you, it knocks over things, it eats a ton of hay, and it smells like an elephant, and yet we have to swear that it's not there. Henry Morris, who served as a professor of applied science in Southern Illinois University, said this, quote, "Belief in evolution is a remarkable phenomenon. It is a belief passionately defended by the scientific establishments, despite lack of any observable scientific evidence from macroevolution." Dr. John Klotz, who is a biologist and a geneticist, PhD in biology from the University of Pittsburgh, former professor of biology and chairman of the Division of Natural Sciences at Concordia, says this, quote, It is clear that much of the structure of modern evolutionary paleontology rests upon the assumptions which are by their nature not capable of verification. There is no disagreement with many of the observations of paleontology, but there may be disagreement with the interpretations which are placed on these observations. I hope you're getting an idea of what's happening here. This is the tenuous relationship between science and evolution, okay? And again, I've got hundreds more. If you'd like to see more examples of exactly this kind of stuff, come see me. I'll give you reams of volumes, okay? So why the disparity? And why, more importantly, are we only being, for the most part, given one side of it? How does that work? How can you feed the public only one side? Well, it's because of the relationship between evolution and politics. Evolution and politics. Let's talk about that for a moment. See, geneticists see clearly the evidence for intelligent design, And there's no question in their minds, but peer pressure and financial considerations and political correctness and the financial environment and a fanatical commitment to naturalism within the institution forced them to look the other way and insist that they actually see nothing. And this is how evolution is perpetuated in modern society. And this is why you only usually get one side of it when you're watching a documentary. See, evolution's role within pop culture and academia has been largely politically engineered and very much so intentionally. You know that Jurassic Park recently came out, the latest version of it. The guy that created that, his name is Michael Crichton. He's, by the way, also a scientist. He gave a lecture at Caltech in 2003. He's a physician, and he's the guy that wrote Jurassic Park. Here's what Michael Crichton said at a lecture he was giving at Caltech University. Listen to his words, quote, "In regard to consensus, I regard consensus in science as an extremely pernicious development." I'll read that again. "I regard consensus in science as an extremely pernicious development that ought to be stopped cold in its tracks. Historically, the claim of consensus has been that the first refugee scoundrels, it is a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled." So he's saying, look, this idea of science having a consensus on evolution, it's simply a way of saying that the debate has already been settled. He goes on to say this: Whenever you hear the consensus of scientists agrees on something or other, reach for your wallet because you're about to be had. Let's be clear, he says. The work of science has nothing whatsoever to do with consensus. Consensus is the business of politics, but science, on the contrary, requires only one investigator who happens to be right and can prove it. Which means that he or she has the results that are verifiable by reference to the real world. In science, consensus is completely irrelevant. What is relevant is reproducible results. The greatest scientists in history are precisely there because they broke with consensus. There is no such thing as consensus in science. If it's consensus, it's not science. And if it's science, it isn't consensus, period. Here's what he's saying. I don't care if you give me 10,000 scientists and line them up in front of me and say, oh, well, they all agree. You show me one guy that comes with the facts and they're all wrong. You don't do science by consensus. This isn't a popular vote. This isn't a democracy. This isn't raise your hands. This is science. So how is it possible for reasonable, intelligent, well-educated people to hold such dramatically opposite views as evolution and intelligent design? How does that work? What's ultimately the motivating factors here? I want to tell you that question I want to get into specifically and more in detail next week, but just here's some thoughts for you. Science writer and evolutionist Roger Lewin. Now, this is an evolutionist, okay? He's a British prize-winning science writer and author of over 20 books. Dr. Lewin was a staff member of New Scientist in London for 9 years. He went to Washington, D.C. to write for Science magazine for 10 years as the news editor. Lewin wrote 3 books with Richard Leakey, if you remember his name. He became a full-time freelance writer in '89 and concentrated on writing books. In '89, Roger Lewin won the Royal Society Prize for Science Books. Now, here's what this guy says. That's his credentials. Here's what he says, quote, "Scientists, contrary to the myth that they themselves publicly promulgate, are emotional human beings who carry a generous dose of subjectivity with them into the supposedly objective search for truth. The aphorism, 'I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't believed it,' is a continuing truth in science. And of course, it cuts 2 ways. You often see what you expect to see, and you do not see what you don't expect." Another science writer, Paul S. Taylor, says this, quote, "Despite the impression that science textbooks give, brilliant new ideas are not always welcome or even given fair consideration within science. Politics intervene as much as logic does. In one way or another, bias and presupposition affect every scientist's theories, priorities, research methods, decisions, and interpretations. Whether it be molecules, test results on rocks, evidence cannot evaluate, prioritize, or interpret itself. Humans suggest meaning to the evidence. They interpret it based on their own beliefs, and then they build theories upon that interpretation. Scientists are humans first and scientists second." He goes on to say, "Being people, scientists," catch this, "do not always objectively seek truth wherever it might lead. All people hold biases toward particular viewpoints. Because scientists are human, they're subject to self-deception, pride, self-interest, etc. There are those in both camps, both evolutionists and creationists, who do not always practice good science. No person or institution is infallible or above question." And he finishes by saying this, "Each person's particular set of biases is a result of personal life experiences, relationships, parents, schools, peers, teachers, personal practices, and the pressures of life. It is difficult for any person to deal objectively with evidence which has the potential to be destructive to one's cherished beliefs." Follow that? Why? Because of pride, or because they're detrimental to one's personal security in whatever form. Okay. What is this saying? It's saying that no matter who you are, no matter what side of the debate you're on, you are vested. You're vested to a degree, and you're flawed. You're a human being. Scientists aren't some kind of different life form out there that, doesn't make mistakes, isn't prone to pressure and ego and pride and emotion. Now, the current scientific environment that we find ourselves in today relies heavily on socio-political activism. You say, where did you get that? I'll tell you. I'm glad you asked. See, the MO here is clear. The following is a quote I'm going to give you. This is from the Journal of Clinical Investigation, okay? The Journal of Clinical Investigation. This is a peer-reviewed deal. And it talks about, this is a letter from the scientific establishment to members of the scientific establishment. And here's what it's on. It's on the subject of how do we deal with this rising idea of intelligent design that's coming from the scientific community. How do we suppress it? How do we stop it? How do we deal with it? Here it is. And this talks about the action that every evolutionary scientist should take to suppress the teachings of intelligent design. And I quote, "We must write letters to our newspaper, organize campus evolution groups." Now, as I'm reading this, I want you to kind of digest the words that are being used, the vocabulary being used, and see what it sounds like. Listen to this. Listen to this. "We should organize campus evolution groups. We should organize regular meetings to plan special events such as Darwin Day and celebrations that can serve as outreach exercises. Participate in outreach activities. Go to local schools and talk to classes about science in general and evolution in particular. Revise textbooks. Scientists engaged in textbook writing should be more cognizant of the need to educate future scientists and science teachers about evolution. Become more effective lobbyists for legislation. Lobbyists for legislation. Outreach. Whew. Work with your legislators, it goes on to say. A nationwide overhaul of these programs is essential. New introductory courses are needed to provide a background in evolutionary biology in the very beginning of all programs leading to scientific education degrees. Whew. And all the courses should be required to get a degree. New lower-level courses for non-majors pitched at the level appropriate for students with minimal science background are needed to expose as many citizens as possible to evolution. Now, this is from the Journal of Clinical Investigation. I've got the citing here. If you'd like it, I'll give it to you after the service. Just ask me for it, okay? Are you understanding what this is starting to sound like? I mean, these are scientists writing to scientists, talking about lobbying, talking about, it almost sounds like evangelism efforts. There's a book by William Broad and Nicholas Wade called Betrayers of the Truth, Fraud and Deceit in the Halls of Science. And part of the book says this: science is often much more than a dispassionate quest for truth. It examines the kinds of pressures that can lead scientists to stray. With documented cases of scientific fraud, this book challenges the controversial view of science. Dr. Bruce Dan, senior editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association. Dr. Bruce Dan, he is the senior editor of the Journal of the American Medical Association. I want you to get the scope of this guy, okay? You've heard of the American Medical Association. He says this, quote, "It doesn't take much to take a little bit of the data, change it in a way that you want it to look, and then publish it. And it is almost impossible to detect that." You see that? Okay. That's evolution in politics. Let's talk briefly in the end here about not just evolution in politics, but about evolution and philosophy. The vast majority of scientific institutions are rooted in the philosophy of secular humanism. Now, if you're not familiar with secular humanism, you need to understand what it is. The materialistic philosophy of secular humanism is this, and by the way, I'm quoting from the Council of Secular Humanism. This is their own stuff about themselves, okay? Here it comes. Secular humanism is a comprehensive, non-religious life stance. Secular humanism is comprehensive, touching every aspect of life, including issues of values, meaning, and identity. Thus, it is broader than atheism alone, which concerns only the non-existence of God or the supernatural. Important as that may be, there is a lot more to life, and secular humanism addresses it. The unique message of secular humanism on the current world scene is its commitment to scientific naturalism. We talked about what naturalism is. Naturalism is the commitment to the idea that nature is all there is, okay? Most worldviews, this is again continuing their quote, most worldviews accepted today are spiritual, mystical, or theological in character. They have their origins in ancient, pre-urban, nomadic, and agricultural societies of the past, not in the modern industrial or post-industrial global information culture that is now emerging. Scientific naturalism enables human beings to construct a coherent worldview, disentangled from the metaphysics or theology and based on the sciences alone. Okay? That's the definition. That's the definition of secular humanism, okay? So, in the end, and you got to catch this, you got to follow this, okay? What we're saying is what you can see, hear, smell, taste, feel, touch is all there is, and if you should give me evidence or try to support the idea that there is something else outside of that, we just presuppose that that isn't true from the beginning, okay? Now, here's the irony. The irony is that even those who are believers in Darwinian macroevolution admit that it takes a miracle in order for life to take place. The only difference between those scientists who are secular humanists and those who believe in intelligent design is the source of the miracle. Now, make no mistake about this. Those who believe in Darwinian evolution, okay, those who believe in secular humanism believe in miracles. Just not the kind that come from God. You say, where do you get that from? I'll show you. According to secular humanists, life began by chance and time. And according to them, time can actually do miracles. I'll give you an example. Nobel Prize-winning evolutionist George Wald, in his book, Origin of Life, wrote this, quote, "However improbable it might be, we regard this event or any of the steps which it involves, given enough time, it will almost certainly happen at least once. He's talking about evolution, how life sprung up out of nothing. Time is, in fact, he goes on to say, the hero of the plot. The time with which we have to deal is on the order of 2 billion years. What we regard as impossible on the basis of human experience is meaningless here. Do you catch what this scientist is saying? What we regard as being impossible has no meaning here. It's irrelevant. What we regard as impossible on the basis of human experience, now what we regard on the basis of human experience is science, but that's meaningless here, he says. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. Wow, this is a scientist. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible, and the possible becomes probable, and the probable eventually becomes certain. One has only to wait, he finishes by saying, one has only to wait. Time itself performs miracles. Is there a difference here between what we're believing other than the source? Their God is time. He performs miracles. My God is a person. Evolutionist Richard Lewontin. This is the last quote I'll read you. But I just want you to catch the weight of this. This is Richard Lewontin. His degrees are like, his experiences. He's an evolutionary scientist. He's an evolutionist. He believes in evolution. He supports evolution. And he writes in the New York Review, I'll give you the exact reference. It's January 1997. It's on page 31. Here's what he writes. This is the quote. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs. We take the side of science in spite of the failure of science to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, and in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unjustifiable so-so theories. Because we have a prior commitment. A commitment to materialism. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenon of the world. I'll read that again. This is subtle. You gotta catch this, folks. I'll read this part again. So he just talked about his commitment to materialism. Here's why. It is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus for investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated they may be. Moreover, that materialism is an absolute. Why? Because we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. If you didn't catch that, you're missing the whole thing. This is the position of scientists who believe in Darwinian macroevolution. It's not that science doesn't support intelligence design. It's that we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. Understand that. Oh man, I told you I wouldn't give you any more quotes. I lied. One more. This is a peer-reviewed journal. This is a quote from a peer-reviewed journal, and it contains the following statement, quote, and I'll give you the reference if you'd like it. The myth that there are persecuted scientists who disagree with evolution is easily debunked by the scarcity of peer-reviewed publications on intelligent design. Now, here's what they're saying. They're saying that those guys going around saying, look, there's tons of scientists out there who believe in intelligent design, but they are suppressed. They are not allowed to speak. They are being persecuted by the scientific institutions. They're saying that's nonsense. That's not true. That doesn't exist. On what basis? Listen to it. It is proven by the fact that there is a scarcity of peer-reviewed publications on intelligent design. So what they're saying is this, catch it. The reason that we don't believe that there's a bunch of scientists out there who believe in intelligent design is because they haven't published much in peer-reviewed journals on science. Now, remember we talked about the idea of secular humanism? Scientific institutions exist and are based on scientific principles, which they say the scientific principles must include secular humanism. Okay? So, here's the bottom line. This is a problem with logic here. This is circular reasoning 101. What they're saying is the only peer review that is allowed is those that have been done by those who pledge themselves to believe in Darwinian macroevolution. Otherwise, you're not going to get peer reviewed. If you don't believe in Darwinian macroevolution, you're not going to get published in a scientific journal. You're not going to get peer reviewed. It's not going to happen. See, these are the people who decide what gets published out there. Just like there's people who decide what gets put on Discovery Channel. They support their beliefs by the writings of those who share their own beliefs. Academics who determine who gets published in peer-reviewed journals are those exclusive academics themselves, whose primary qualification for membership in a scientific society is that you must believe in Darwinian macroevolution. It's nuts. I mean, it's like saying the fact that there are no conservative ideologies being printed in liberal publications is proof that there's no credit to that. Proof that their views are not credible or do not exist. It's nonsense. The views exist, they're just not being published because they're not being allowed to be published. They're being suppressed, they're being stifled. They are the institutional gatekeepers. It's a witch trial. You ever heard of how a witch trial goes? You hold the gal under the water for 5 minutes. You know, if she doesn't make it, she was a witch. That's how it works. It's nuts. Oh, you believe in intelligent design? Pfft, you're not a scientist. Simple. You can't get published. You can't get peer reviewed. This is why when showing the scientific inadequacy of evolution, I usually try to avoid quoting scientists who believe in intelligent design. I usually try to quote the evolutionists themselves, the atheists themselves, those who believe in secular humanism themselves. See, most scientists, however, most scientists and most teachers, public school, high school, are not some big bad guys that are trying to destroy people's faith. Not at all. In fact, most of them are simply victims of that to which they have been exposed all their lives. What difference could they know? Some honestly believe in the theory of evolution because the educational system doesn't present the other side. And the institution will not allow for anything but conformity with Darwinian macroevolution. So, don't blame your teachers. Your high school teachers usually love you. They care for you, okay? Don't blame your college professors necessarily. They've been a part of the same system. They've run through the machine. Many are simply forced to keep quiet about their views on intelligent design due to the extreme political and financial pressure that's put on them. From teachers who are not allowed by the district to teach anything else but evolution, to the college professor who must toe the party line, to the researcher who will not get a job and who will not get his grant if he were to voice his skepticism. So, in closing, how do we synthesize this? How do we approach it? What do we take away from this, and how do we deal with the people that are on the other side? A couple quick observations and we're done. I want you to understand this truth. The truth, if not undergirded by love, it makes the possessor of that truth obnoxious and the truth repulsive. If truth is not undergirded by love, it makes the possessor of that truth obnoxious and the truth repulsive, okay? Please, guys, don't go around and bash your high school or your college professors. If you're in high school, don't go around bashing your high school biology teacher. Have respect for them. They're under a tremendous amount of pressure. Love them, care for them, be polite, be generous, be kind to them. But do address the issues. Do it in a way that allows them to save face. Do it kindly, but do address it. James chapter 3, verse 17 tells us this. James 3:17 says, "But wisdom that's from above is first pure, then peaceable, then gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere. And a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace." One more passage, 1 Peter 3:15. 1 Peter 3:15 says, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for the reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect." I want to emphasize the gentleness and respect part this morning, but I also want to emphasize the other part of it. Be always prepared to make a defense. I want to talk to two sides and I'm done. Let me speak to those of us who are Christians. I want to tell you that you do not have to hide your head under a rock. You do not have to run. You do not have to retreat. You do not have to back off. You don't have to check your brain at the door. You don't have to quit insisting on truth. You don't have to stop advocating science. Quite the contrary. For those of you who have been made fun of, who have been ridiculed, who have been persecuted, who have been laughed at, who have been mocked, who have been called stupid and primitive and whatever because of your faith, let me tell you, you don't have to run. It's nonsense. The facts are there and the facts are in your favor. Don't run from them. And secondly, for those of you who are on the other side of the debate, for those of you who are on the side of believing in evolution, for those of you who may be teachers or professors or in the professional sciences working as professors or researchers, may I say to you with the utmost kindness and love, I absolutely respect you. I respect the fact that you're skeptical. It's good. I want you to continue being skeptical because skepticism forces you to look at the facts, and the facts always lead to the truth, and the truth always leads you to Jesus. Jesus says, if you know the truth will set you free. Those of you who are on that side, we love you. We have respect for you. If you're ever treated by a Christian in a callous way, in an unkind way, let me publicly right here and right now apologize to you. It's wrong, and I'm sorry for it. We love you. We don't think we're any better than you. We don't think we're any sharper than you, any smarter than you, any more moral than you. We love you. We're fellow human beings. Let's continue the conversation together, shall we? Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your truth. Thank you for the fact that you've given us this tool of intelligence through which we can learn science, through which we can apprehend truth, through which we can understand the world around us. Lord, these things are not things you hide from us, Lord. You're not a distant God and you're not a hidden God, and you invite us saying, come, look at my creation and see who I am. Lord, thank you for that. Lord, I lift up this morning those who continue to believe in you in spite of seemingly insurmountable odds. Lord, renew their hearts, renew their strength. Give them peace. Let them know they're not alone, and let them know that the facts are on their side. Father, those who have not yet believed in you, Lord, we ask that we would engage them with the utmost kindness, the utmost respect, the utmost gentility. That, Lord, we would represent you not just by facts, but by our actions and our heart and our attitude, that we would love those who do not know you yet, that we would be able to dialogue with them in a way that shows your love for them. Father, thank you for truth. And thank you that through your Son, the truth sets us free. For if we're free by you, we'll be free indeed. In Jesus' name, amen.